No one at the Al Noor restaurant imagined that the night would end in absolute silence. But a single question was already on its way, ready to cut through the luxury, the power, and the memory of everyone present. Because a simple mistake in the order was about to explode into a staggering question: who made this dish? And that would be capable of completely changing the course of the restaurant and the life of every person there. Al Noor wasn't just expensive. It was a place where silence carried weight and meaning, where the glow of crystal chandeliers didn't illuminate, it watched. White marble tables reflected golden tones while conversations were kept low, not out of courtesy, but out of hierarchy. No one came there to satisfy hunger, they came to confirm status. At the center of the dining room, at a reserved table with a privileged view, sat Khalid al-Rashid, a billionaire and global investor, a name that crossed borders without needing to be announced. For him, dinners like that were merely part of the routine, contracts signed between sips of imported water in dishes too sophisticated to stir any real emotion. Over time, food had become functional, reduced to fuel for endless commitments, stripped of memory and soul. While his guests spoke of numbers, mergers, and acquisitions, Khalid barely listened. His gaze wandered across the room with the boredom of someone who believed he had already seen everything. On the other side of that invisible hierarchy, Sarah moved between the tables. She wore a simple uniform in light tones and maintained a restrained, almost calculated posture. She moved with the precision of someone who learned early that any mistake costs more when you are invisible. She had been working at Al Noor for months. She arrived before sunrise and left when the city was already asleep, serving dishes she could never afford to people who rarely looked her in the eyes. That night, the kitchen was operating under maximum pressure. Fully booked reservations, special requests, and demands whispered like military orders. Khalid's dish was the most expensive on the menu, a sophisticated reinterpretation of lamb, signed by award-winning chefs. Everything had to come out perfect. Sarah checked the order, confirmed the table number, and balanced the plate with absolute care. As she walked toward the center of the room, she felt something strange, as if the air had grown heavier. She ignored the feeling. She had learned early that emotions have no place in luxury restaurants. She served the dish in silence, keeping her eyes lowered, and stepped away as she always did. Khalid lifted his fork to his mouth without paying attention, expecting just another forgettable flavor. But there was an almost imperceptible pause, followed by a slight furrow of his brow. Something was different. The aroma didn't match the menu's description. There was an unexpected depth, an ancient note that didn't belong in that place. As Sarah continued her routine, unaware, something awakened at the most powerful table in the restaurant. Khalid's heart beat faster, as it hadn't there in decades. For a brief instant, the dining room seemed to disappear, replaced by another table, another time, another life. Subscribe to the channel now and discover how a simple mistake was able to change everything that night. When he pushed back his chair and stood up, the gesture alone was enough to freeze the room. Cutlery stopped midair, conversations fell silent one by one, and the manager felt his face turn pale. What could be seen in Khalid was not anger, but something far more unsettling. Because that flavor did not belong to that restaurant, nor to that luxury, nor to that life. It belonged to his childhood. And when the silence finally broke, no one there would be ready. Khalid remained standing, motionless, as if his own body had forgotten how to obey. The flavor was still there, persistent and untamed. He slowly brought a hand to his chest, feeling his heart beat harder, something that hadn't happened in that room for decades. It wasn't physical discomfort. It was confusion. A mixture of strangeness and recognition he hadn't allowed himself to feel since he was very young. He looked at the plate in front of him as if it were an intruder. That made no sense. Not in that restaurant. Not in that life. Khalid took a deep breath. The entire dining room held its breath with him. Until he released it out loud, almost like a shout. Who made this dish? The voice cut through the room like a sharp blade. The manager turned pale. That kind of question never ended well. For a moment, everyone believed it was fury. But it wasn't. Khalid wasn't angry. He was shaken. Because that flavor didn't belong to that restaurant. It belonged to his childhood. In the kitchen, silence turned into panic. The head chef felt sweat run down the back of his neck as he tried to mentally reconstruct every step of the preparation. The assistants exchanged tense looks. A mistake like that, in front of Khalid al-Rashid, could cost not only jobs but entire reputations. "Check the ticket," someone whispered. "Check the ingredients," said another. Have you ever felt that something simple brought back a memory you thought was lost? Write in the comments, memory. Then, in the middle of that silent chaos, Sarah took a step forward. Her heart hammered in her chest. She knew exactly what had happened. In the rush of service, the plates had been switched. The sophisticated lamb, signed by award-winning chefs, was ready, but it had been delivered to the wrong table. The dish Khalid had tasted was another one. Something that didn't exist on the menu and should never have left the kitchen. She felt the weight of the choice even before speaking. Still, she lifted her gaze and said, "It was me, sir." The voice came out low, but firm. A murmur rippled through the room. "The waitress?" Khalid turned slowly, as if every muscle required effort. His eyes settled on Sarah with absolute intensity. "You cooked this?" She nodded. "It wasn't meant to be served," she said. "It was a dish I prepared in the kitchen, for the staff." The manager stepped forward, desperate. "Sir, I apologize, there was an operational error." Silence. The word fell heavy, unquestionable. Khalid moved closer to Sarah. "Where does this recipe come from?" The waitress swallowed hard. "From my family. It's an old dish, with Arab roots. My mother used to make it when I was a child." At that moment, something changed in Khalid's face. It wasn't irritation, but something more dangerous. It was emotion. "That flavor," he murmured. "It's identical to what my mother used to make. Simply identical." Sarah felt her eyes burn. "She used to say that food isn't measured by technique," she added, "but by intention." The entire dining room listened, and no one dared to breathe. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was dense. Khalid remained standing, his hands resting lightly on the table, as if he needed that contact to stay anchored in the present. The plate was still there. Untouched now. But alive. "After my mother passed away," he continued, "no one cooked in that house anymore. There was food. There always was. But there was no presence." The guests avoided looking at him. Some felt they were witnessing something that did not belong to them. "I grew up believing that filling the silence required success," Khalid said. "Money. Recognition. Control. And that worked for a while. But none of these dishes," he made a vague gesture toward the table, "ever managed to bring back what I lost." Sarah listened in silence, not as an employee, but as someone who recognized that pain. "My mother's food," she said, "was the only thing that made my father sit at the table after hard days. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded us who we still were." Khalid nodded slowly. "Exactly that." The manager cleared his throat, nervous. "Sir, the guests are. They can wait." Khalid replied, without turning his face. He turned back to Sarah. "You spoke about surviving." She took a deep breath. "Talent doesn't always find space. Sometimes, it only finds necessity." There was something raw in that sentence. Something neither of them could pretend not to hear. "I know that feeling," Khalid said. "Just from the other side. When everything you've built no longer holds you up." He walked a few steps through the room, observing the environment with different eyes. The golden light seemed less impressive now. More artificial. This place, he continued, calls this luxury. But luxury without memory is just vanity. Some guests shifted in their chairs. Khalid stopped in front of Sarah. If you had freedom, he repeated, now with more weight, what would you do with this food? Sarah didn't need to think before answering. I would feed people. Truly. With stories. With roots. With respect. Khalid closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted inside him. It wasn't a business decision. It was personal. My mother used to say, he murmured, that what truly feeds us never dies. He looked at Sarah. And some memories find the right moment to return. The room remained in absolute silence. But there, something invisible had already been decided. And when that night came to an end, nothing would ever be the same again. That same night, Khalid cancelled every remaining commitment on his schedule. No calls were returned, no deals received attention. He asked the restaurant to close service early and, when the dining room began to empty, he sat at the table with Sarah in a way no one there had ever seen him do before, not as a billionaire, not as an investor, but as someone willing to listen. They talked at length about mothers. About recipes that were never written down, but repeated through generations. About how certain aromas can travel through time and restore a sense of belonging that the adult world insists on stealing. Sarah told him how her mother cooked without haste, even when there was little, and how she used to say that what is meant to last cannot be rushed. Khalid listened in silence, recognizing in every word fragments of a life he believed he had left behind. At that table, power had no place. Luxury neither. There was only memory. A few days later, Khalid sought Sarah out again. There was no formal meeting, no grand speeches. He went straight to the point, like someone who finally understands the weight of his own choices. He said he didn't want to open just another restaurant, but to create a space where traditional Arab food would be treated as a living heritage, not as a sophisticated product emptied of meaning. A place where recipes wouldn't need to adapt to the market, but remain faithful to what they had always been. I want you to cook the way your mother cooked, he said. Without haste. Without concessions. Without needing to please anyone. Sarah tried to respond, but couldn't. The tears came before the words, not because of the opportunity itself, but because of the recognition it carried. Because of the rare feeling of being seen not merely as labor, but as a guardian of something greater. Months later, the place opened its doors. There was no excessive ostentation, no empty performances designed to impress. The space was simple, welcoming, guided by deep aromas and quiet stories that revealed themselves with every dish served. People didn't go there to be seen, but to remember. To sit, to taste, and to remain. Khalid began to frequent the restaurant often, but never as the owner. He preferred to observe, to ask questions, to learn how to wait. Little by little, he discovered that he had spent his entire life mastering numbers, markets, and negotiations, but had never learned to truly listen. He had conquered the world, accumulated enough power and influence to cross borders with ease, but it was there, in that space built from a shared memory, that he relearned how to feel. And it all began with a mistake. A swapped dish. A flavor that should not have been there. And a question that cut through luxury, time, and power, echoing forever. Who made this dish? Because, in the end, it is not titles, numbers, or seats at the table that define who we are. What remains is what touches memory, what crosses time without asking permission. True value is never in the price of the dish, but in the story it carries, in the intention of the one who prepares it, and in the humility of the one who allows themselves to feel. When power learns to listen and pride gives way to respect, even a simple mistake can become redemption, reminding us that sometimes, we must lose control to rediscover what truly matters.